welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. I was halfway through my shift at the Clearwater hydroelectric plant when the emergency alert came through. The sharp, robotic tone of the emergency broadcast system blared through the radio I kept clipped to my belt, cutting off the usual hum of the generator room. This is a state emergency alert. Avoid approaching sources of unexplained light. Shelter indoors and remain in areas with artificial lighting. Do not attempt to investigate. The words sent a shiver down my spine, but I barely had time to process them before my work phone rang. "Logan, you hearing this?" It was my supervisor, Jim Holloway, his voice tight with stress. "Yeah," I said, turning down the volume of the radio. "What the hell does that mean?" "Unexplained light." "No idea, but we've got a problem. Power's flickering in parts of Clearwater. And I just got a call from a guy near Sutter's Hollow. Says his whole damn house is glowing." I frowned, running a hand through my hair. Sutter's Hollow was a small, secluded town nestled near the river, a good 20 miles from the nearest main road. Barely 300 people lived there, mostly old-timers who didn't care for modern convenience. "You want me to check it out?" I asked. Jim hesitated. "You're closest. Just be careful. And keep your damn lights on." The line went dead. I grabbed my flashlight and my company truck keys and headed out into the night. The drive toward Sutter's Hollow was uneventful at first. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, and my headlights cut through the rolling mist rising from the riverbanks. Everything felt normal until it didn't. A few miles from the town limits, my dashboard lights flickered and the radio cut to static. Then, in the distance, I saw it. A soft, pulsing glow, barely visible through the trees. It wasn't like normal light. It didn't have a clear source like a street lamp or a house window. It was shifting, moving, almost like it was breathing. My hands clenched the wheel. I was trained in electrical systems, not whatever the hell this was. Then my work phone buzzed. A call. No number. I hesitated, then answered. First, all I heard was heavy breathing. Then a voice. A woman's, frantic and shaking. "Hello? Is someone there? This is Logan from Clearwater Hydroelectric." "Who is this?" A pause. Then a whispered, "It's inside my house." My stomach turned. "Ma'am, what's inside your house?" The woman let out a shaky breath. "The light. A sharp crackling sound came through the speaker, like an electrical surge, followed by a deep hum. Then silence. I gritted my teeth, pushing the truck forward. The glow ahead grew brighter. By the time I reached Sutter's Hollow, the town was too quiet. No barking dogs. No distant hum of televisions through windows. No voices. The only sound was the soft buzzing of power lines, some of them surging with strange flickers of light. I pulled up to the house I assumed was the woman's. Her front door was wide open, the porch light dimmed and stuttering. Stepping out, I felt the static in the air, like the charged atmosphere before a storm. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the yard. Then I saw them, footprints in the dirt, leading away from the house. They weren't hurried like someone running for their life. They were slow, deliberate, like the person had simply walked toward something. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I stepped inside. The living room was empty. A half-eaten meal sat on the dining table. A chair was knocked over. The television was on, but the screen only showed a bright white glow. I grabbed my radio. "This is Logan Harper, Clearwater Hydroelectric. If anyone in Sutter's Hollow can hear me, respond." Nothing but static. Then a voice, faint and distorted. "Don't look." I turned sharply, heart pounding. The voice had come from the television. I took a cautious step forward. The glow on the screen shifted, almost like it was watching me back. Then, from outside, footsteps, slow, dragging. I killed my flashlight and moved to the window. First, I saw nothing. Just the empty street, the flickering power lines, the mist rolling over the pavement. Then movement. A figure stepped into the glow of a malfunctioning street lamp. It was one of the missing townsfolk. An old man, wearing pajamas and a robe, walking with an unnatural stillness. His eyes were wide open, locked on something in the distance. His mouth moved soundlessly, as if muttering to himself. Then, without hesitation, he turned and walked straight into the forest, toward the pulsing glow. I felt my stomach drop. "Sir," I called out. No response. He just kept walking toward the light. I grabbed my radio again. "Jim, I need backup at Sutter's Hollow. Something's not right." Static. Then, another alert broadcast cut through. "This is a state emergency alert. Do not attempt to look directly at the lights. Do not respond to voices. If you have seen the light, remain indoors." My grip on the radio tightened. The warning had changed, and then, from deeper in the woods, I heard something. A low, vibrating hum, almost like a power line about to blow. Then a voice, my voice, calling out from within the trees. "Logan, come here." The blood in my veins turned ice cold. I hadn't spoken. I backed away from the window, trying to calm my breathing. Another figure appeared in the street. A woman this time, her hair hanging over her face. Her lips moved soundlessly, but I couldn't hear the words. And she, too, turned and walked toward the glow. I had to get out of here. I turned, gripping the door handle. A flicker of light in the hallway. The television. The glow on the screen was moving, not randomly. It was forming a shape, a rough, flickering silhouette of me. The air in the room hummed with energy, a pulling sensation like static crawling over my skin. I shoved myself backward out the door just as the screen flashed blinding white. Gasping, I stumbled into the truck, fumbling with the keys. As I peeled out of the driveway, I stole a final glance in the rearview mirror. The glow in the woods had grown brighter, stretching outward, and I wasn't sure, but I thought I saw shadows moving inside it. Then, over the radio, one last thing. A whisper, layered over static. "Don't run toward the light." I sped out of Sutter's Hollow, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The glow in the forest lingered in my rearview mirror, pulsing like a slow, rhythmic heartbeat. My breath came in ragged gasps. The emergency alert still echoed in my mind. "Do not attempt to look directly at the lights. Do not respond to voices." I had already broken both of those rules. The radio crackled with static. I reached for it with one shaking hand. "Jim, do you copy? I need a response. Sutter's Hollow is empty. People are just walking into the woods. Something's wrong." A few seconds of silence. Then a voice, distant and fragmented. "Stay where you are." It barely sounded like Jim. The words stretched unnaturally, as if a bad signal was warping his voice. I tightened my grip on the radio. "Jim, you're cutting out. Say that again." The response came immediately, clearer this time. "Stay where you are." A chill ran down my spine. Something was off. I glanced at my work phone, no signal. The radio signal was unstable, but I wasn't far enough from Clearwater to be completely cut off. Then the lights in the distance shifted. Not the power lines, those were already flickering. The glow from the forest. It was spreading. I slammed the brakes. My truck skidded on the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust as I leaned forward, eyes wide. The glow wasn't stationary anymore. It was moving, like it was searching. A shape flickered at the tree line, a silhouette of a person, but something was wrong with it. The figure didn't move like a normal person. It wavered, shifting in and out of sight like a heat mirage. Its limbs were too long, and its head tilted unnaturally. My gut told me to hit the gas, get out of here, but my radio buzzed again. "Logan!" I froze. The voice was different now, softer, familiar. I swallowed hard. It was my brother's voice, but that was impossible. My brother had been dead for 6 years. My grip on the steering wheel trembled. I had to get out of here. As I got closer to the highway, I noticed something else was wrong. More houses were abandoned. Some had their doors open. Others had flickering lights in the windows, casting strange, elongated shadows. But what made my stomach drop was the vehicles. Every car I passed was empty, doors hanging open, engines still running. As if people had stepped out in the middle of driving and just left. Something had called them away. The emergency alert hadn't come fast enough. My fingers itched to check my phone again, but I knew it was useless. I was still cut off. Then I saw it. A police cruiser, lights flashing weakly. Relief flooded my chest. Someone else was still here. I pulled up behind it, throwing my truck into park. Stepping out, I called, "Hello!" No response. I approached cautiously, my boots crunching against the gravel. The driver's side door was wide open. The officer's radio was still on, the speaker hissing with static. No officer in sight. My pulse pounded as I leaned inside. The keys were still in the ignition. The engine was running. On instinct, I reached for the radio. "This is Logan Harper, Clearwater Hydroelectric. If anyone's on this frequency, please respond." Silence. Then a voice, warbling and distorted. "Help us." I sucked in a breath. "Who is this?" "The light." The transmission cut out. A low humming sound filled the air. I turned sharply. The trees beyond the road were glowing, and something was standing between them. No, some things, at least a dozen figures, standing motionless in the glow. My stomach twisted into a knot. They looked human, but their eyes were wrong. Their eyes weren't reflecting the light. They were absorbing it. A deep vibration filled the air, rattling my bones. The figures tilted their heads in unison. Then they took a step forward. I bolted back to my truck, slamming the door shut. As I peeled away, I saw more figures emerging from the homes and streets. They were all walking the same way, toward the glow. I didn't stop driving until I reached the edge of Clearwater. As I crossed into town, I spotted the National Guard checkpoint ahead. Soldiers stood at the barricade, rifles raised. Their headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road. One of them stepped forward, hand raised. I stopped the truck and rolled the window down. The soldier's face was tight with exhaustion. His name patch read Reeves. "You from Sutter's Hollow?" he demanded. I nodded, still catching my breath. "Yeah, I work at the hydro plant." "What the hell is going on?" Reeves glanced at the other soldiers before leaning in. "You didn't look at the light, did you?" My throat went dry. I thought about the glow in the woods, the television screen shifting, forming my reflection. The way the radio called to me in my brother's voice. I didn't answer right away. Reeves took a step back, hand moving toward his holster. "Sir," he said, voice firm, "I need you to step out of the vehicle." I hesitated. Reeves' hand was still on his holster, fingers twitching slightly. The way he was looking at me, like he was waiting for me to make a wrong move, set every nerve in my body on edge. "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated. I licked my dry lips. "Look, I don't know what's happening, but I just came from Sutter's Hollow. The town is empty. People just walked away. I barely made it out." Reeves didn't react. His eyes scanned my face, searching for something. Then he reached up and tapped his earpiece. "We've got another one. Says he's from the hydro plant." A garbled voice responded through static. I couldn't make out the words, but I caught one thing. "Scan him." Reeves nodded at another soldier, a younger guy holding a small handheld device. He stepped forward, lifting it toward my face. I instinctively pulled back. "Hey, what the hell is that?" Reeves' expression didn't change. "Pupil scanner. Just a precaution." I glanced at the gun on his hip, then at the rifle slung over another soldier's back. I didn't have a choice. I swallowed and forced myself to hold still. The soldier pressed a button. A red light flickered over my eyes, scanning for maybe 3 seconds before the device beeped. The young soldier checked the screen. After a tense moment, he gave a nod. "He's clean." I exhaled, my shoulders slumping. Reeves still looked tense, but he stepped back. "All right, get out and follow me. And don't stare at any lights." I climbed out of the truck and followed him toward the makeshift military post set up along the highway. Sandbags, Humvees, and floodlights surrounded the area. Several soldiers were watching the perimeter, their faces tight with unease. I spotted a row of people sitting on the ground, wrists zip-tied. Civilians. Some were shaking. Others were staring blankly at the dirt, unblinking. One of them, an older man, was muttering something under his breath. "The light is inside," he whispered. "Inside all of us." A soldier stood nearby, watching them with his rifle clutched tight. Something was very, very wrong. Reeves led me toward a tent near the center of the checkpoint. Inside, a woman in military fatigues was speaking into a radio. I caught a snippet of her conversation. "Sutter's Hollow is compromised. No survivors accounted for. No, we can't risk sending another team." She turned as we entered, eyes locking onto me immediately. Her name patch read Lieutenant Morgan. "This the guy?" she asked Reeves. He nodded. "Logan Harper. Works at the hydro plant." Morgan studied me. "Did you look at the light?" I hesitated. But I also knew that saying yes would probably get me zip-tied next to the others outside. So I shook my head. "No. I saw it from a distance, but I never looked directly." Morgan didn't seem convinced, but she didn't push. Instead, she gestured to a makeshift map laid out on the table. The area around Sutter's Hollow was completely blacked out. "The anomaly is spreading," she muttered, mostly to herself. "Faster than we projected." I swallowed hard. "What is it?" Morgan exchanged a look with Reeves. Then she sighed. "We don't know." "That's not a good answer," I muttered. "It's the only one we have." She folded her arms. "People who see the lights up close become unresponsive. Sometimes they walk away and don't stop. Other times they just stand there, like they're listening to something we can't hear." I shuddered, remembering the figures in the woods, standing motionless in the glow. Morgan continued, "The weirdest part? Some of them don't disappear completely. Some come back. And when they do," she trailed off. I frowned. "What?" Before she could answer, a loud crackling noise erupted from outside. A soldier's voice rang out. "Contact! Movement in the trees." Reeves was already moving. Morgan grabbed a rifle from the table and rushed out of the tent. I followed, pulse hammering. The glow was approaching. Deep within the tree line, it pulsed rhythmically, growing brighter with each second. Then the figures appeared. They stepped from the woods in slow, unnatural movements. Their faces were blank, their eyes absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. A dozen of them, then 20, then more, all of them walking forward. One of the soldiers yelled something, but they didn't stop. They never stopped. "Hold your fire," Morgan ordered. The figures drew closer. I recognized some of them. The old man from Sutter's Hollow. The woman I'd seen on the street, her hair hanging over her face. Their mouths moved silently, forming words I couldn't hear. The hum in the air grew louder. Then one of them spoke, in a dozen overlapping voices. "You do not belong here." It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a warning. It was a statement. The soldiers backed up, fingers twitching on their triggers. Morgan gritted her teeth. "One more step and we open fire." The figures didn't hesitate. They stepped forward. Fire! Gunfire erupted. The figures collapsed instantly, bodies hitting the ground. For a moment, everything was still. Then I saw it. Their bodies were flickering, like static on a screen. Then they stood back up. No blood, no wounds, as if the bullets had never touched them. A deep vibrating noise filled the air, rattling my skull. The glow surged forward, and this time I heard something within it. A voice, whispering, calling my name. A hand grabbed my shoulder. "Reeves." His face was pale. "Run, run." Reeves' voice barely registered over the humming in my skull. It wasn't just a noise anymore. It was something alive, something worming its way into my thoughts. I turned and ran. Gunfire roared behind me. The soldiers were still shooting, even though it wasn't doing anything. Those people, those things weren't going down. They just kept getting back up. I sprinted toward the barricade, my boots pounding against the pavement. Around me, civilians were screaming, soldiers were shouting orders. The floodlights flickered as the glow crept closer, swallowing everything in its path. That's when I heard it again. A voice, but not just any voice. My father's voice. I almost tripped. My father had been dead for over a decade. Logan, the voice came from the trees, from the glowing figures standing beyond the fence. Logan, don't be afraid. I clenched my jaw and kept running. Behind me, the air crackled. The humming deepened into something more, a frequency, a signal. It didn't feel like sound anymore. It felt like pressure, like something pushing into my thoughts. I forced myself forward, even as the voices grew louder. Come back. You don't have to run. You're supposed to be here. I shut my eyes tight and kept moving. Reeves grabbed my arm, yanking me forward. Don't listen to it. Just keep going. Around us, more people were slowing down. Civilians, soldiers, their heads tilting, their movements becoming sluggish. One of them, a soldier, stopped completely. His gun dropped from his hands. He turned toward the glow, his pupils wide and empty. And then, without hesitation, he walked straight into the light. I barely had time to process it before Morgan's voice rang out. Fall back. Fall back. The remaining soldiers started retreating, dragging civilians with them. I stumbled through the chaos, heart hammering. And then the radios exploded with static. Every single one. The walkies, the earpieces, the mounted comms. All of them erupted into a deafening, piercing white noise. It was so loud I dropped to my knees, clutching my ears. That's when I saw it. Something stepping out of the glow. Not a person, something else. The shape was wrong, constantly shifting like a broken signal. Its form glitched in and out of reality, never holding one shape for long. But I could feel it watching me, even though it had no eyes. I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy. The static was inside my skull, pressing against my thoughts. Then suddenly, a hand grabbed my collar and yanked me backward. Reeves, we need to go. I forced my legs to work and stumbled forward. A Humvee skidded to a stop ahead of us, Morgan waving frantically from the driver's seat. Get in. We didn't hesitate. Reeves practically threw me into the back seat, then jumped in beside me. The second the doors slammed shut, Morgan gunned it. The Humvee tore away from the checkpoint, kicking up dust and debris as it sped down the road. I twisted in my seat, looking back. The checkpoint was gone. The glow had swallowed it whole. The people who had stayed behind, the ones who had stopped running, were no longer there, just like the rest of Sutter's Hollow. The Humvee didn't stop until we were miles from the site. The glow had disappeared behind the dense tree line, but I could still feel it. Morgan finally slowed the vehicle, breathing heavily. Nobody spoke for a while. Then Reeves broke the silence. What the hell was that? Morgan didn't answer. I leaned forward. My hands were still shaking. You knew this was coming. Morgan's grip tightened on the wheel. Not like this, she muttered. Not this fast. Reeves scoffed. That checkpoint was a goddamn death trap. You knew it wouldn't hold. Morgan slammed the brakes. She turned in her seat, eyes burning. Do you think I had a choice? You think we didn't try everything? The second that thing touched the power grid, it was too late. Her voice cracked slightly. We lost entire recon teams. People just vanished. Others came back, but they weren't. She trailed off. Reeves exhaled sharply and rubbed his face. Where do we go now? I asked. Morgan hesitated. Then she pulled a folded map from the glove compartment and spread it out on the dashboard. She pointed to a damn near empty stretch of land west of here. A classified research site, she said. Off the books. No connection to civilian power. No radio signals. No interference. I stared at the map. You're saying this thing spreads through signals? Morgan nodded grimly. It moves through light, sound, and radio waves. It infects frequencies. The moment you listen too long, look too closely. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. I looked at the road ahead. It was dark. No streetlights. No signals. For the first time since this nightmare started, I was grateful for the absence of light. Reeves turned to me. You said you worked at the hydro plant, right? I nodded. His expression hardened. Then you might be our only chance at stopping this thing. I swallowed. I didn't ask what he meant, because deep down I already knew. Whatever this thing was, it had started with the power grid. And if it could spread through electricity, that meant it could be cut off. The only question was, how? The Humvee rumbled forward, disappearing into the darkness. Behind us, the glow flickered, growing stronger, and the radio in the dashboard crackled with faint static. A whisper, almost too quiet to hear, but I knew it was speaking to me, and I knew this wasn't over, not even close. The Humvee's tires rumbled over the cracked pavement. The world outside nothing but darkened trees and abandoned stretches of road. The headlights cut through the blackness, but even that felt dangerous now. I kept staring at the radio. The static was still there, soft, whispering. It wasn't loud enough to understand, but it was there. I forced myself to look away. Morgan drove in silence, her hands gripping the wheel tight enough to turn her knuckles white. Reeves sat in the passenger seat, reloading his rifle, even though I had a sinking feeling that bullets wouldn't do a damn thing against whatever we were up against. The tension inside the vehicle was thick, almost suffocating. I finally broke the silence. "You said it spreads through signals," I muttered. "Does that mean it can hear us right now?" Morgan didn't answer immediately. She just kept driving, her jaw tight. Reeves sighed. "It's hard to explain," he said. "This thing doesn't just move through sound, it becomes it. When people hear it too long, when they stare at the glow too long, something happens to them." I shuddered, remembering the blank-eyed people at the checkpoint, the way they had stood back up. Morgan finally spoke. "We've seen it jump through different forms of transmission. It started with the power grid, then radio signals. But now, it's adapting." I glanced at her. "Adapting how?" Her fingers tightened on the wheel. "It's learning." A cold wave of fear crawled up my spine. I tried to focus on anything else, but my gaze kept drifting to the radio. The static was still there, and it was getting louder. "Turn that thing off," Reeves muttered. Morgan flicked the switch. The radio stayed on. A chill ran through the car. Morgan pressed the button again. Harder. Nothing. The static only grew stronger. I could almost hear something inside it. A voice. Reeves reached for his knife and, without hesitation, slammed the blade into the dashboard, tearing through the wires. Sparks flew. The radio crackled, then it went silent. The three of us sat there, breathing hard. Then, "Logan!" The voice came from the speaker. The radio was destroyed, but the voice still came through. I felt my blood go ice cold. It had said my name. Morgan slammed the gas. We sped forward, tires screeching against the pavement. I squeezed my eyes shut. The voice was still whispering, low and rhythmic, like it was inside my skull, like it had always been there. I forced myself to focus. "How much farther?" Morgan checked the map. 20 miles. "Will it hold?" Reeves asked. Morgan didn't answer. I swallowed hard. The research site, if it really was disconnected from all signals, from all forms of transmission, then maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. But then, the headlights flickered. Morgan cursed under her breath. "No, not now." The dashboard lights dimmed, then came back, then dimmed again. The Humvee's engine hiccuped. Something was wrong. I turned to Reeves. "This thing moves through signals, right?" He nodded. "Then what about the car's electronics?" Realization hit his face. Morgan slammed the brakes. The Humvee screeched to a halt. Then the headlights shut off. The engine died. And in the sudden, unnatural darkness, the glow appeared, flickered in the tree-line, shifting, pulsing. I barely had time to react before something stepped out of the woods. A figure. No figures. Their shapes were wrong, bodies glitching in and out like distorted broadcasts. I felt my breath catch in my throat. One of them stepped forward. His face was recognizable. My father. No, it looked like my father, but it wasn't him. His mouth moved, but the voice that came out wasn't his. "Logan, it's okay." I shook my head, stepping back against the Humvee. This wasn't real. It wasn't real. Morgan cocked her rifle. "Don't look at it. Don't listen." Reeves grabbed my arm. "We need to move. Now." The glow grew brighter. The figures twitched, their bodies flickering like broken TV signals. Then they lunged. "Go!" Morgan yelled. I didn't hesitate. We bolted into the woods, away from the dead Humvee, away from the glow. The trees blurred past me as we ran, branches slashing against my arms. Behind us, the static returned, louder, hungrier, a deafening frequency that made my head feel like it was going to split open. I risked a glance back. The figures were chasing us. Their movements were wrong, like frames skipping in an old videotape. And then Morgan tripped. I turned just in time to see her hit the ground hard, her rifle skidding away. Reeves spun back. Morgan, she pushed herself up, but her eyes went wide. The figure was right behind her. She reached for her sidearm, too late. The thing grabbed her wrist. She screamed, and then her body glitched. Like them, I watched in horror as her form twisted, her edges breaking apart like static. Her face turned toward me, and her eyes were gone, just empty sockets, filled with the glow. Reeves yanked me forward. We can't help her. Move. I wanted to fight. I wanted to run back and pull her free, but she was already gone. She wasn't Morgan anymore. We ran. The static chased us. I felt it in my teeth, in my skull, in the space behind my eyes. Reeves' voice was distant now. I was slipping into the sound. Then, a building, a small, concrete bunker hidden between the trees. Reeves grabbed my arm and shoved me inside. The door slammed shut. The static stopped. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping. The glow was still outside, waiting, but in here, there was silence. The first silence I had heard since this nightmare began. Reeves locked the door. Then he turned to me. We're not safe yet. I swallowed hard, because I knew he was right. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't done with us yet. The bunker was silent. I hadn't heard true silence in what felt like hours. Maybe longer. The glow still flickered outside, bleeding through the cracks of the heavy steel door. But in here, the air was thick and dead. No sound. No static. No voices whispering my name. I pressed my back against the cold concrete wall, trying to slow my breathing. Reeves was doing the same, his rifle held tight against his chest. His face was slick with sweat, but his eyes were sharp, alert. I swallowed hard. Where are we? Reeves exhaled, rubbing his face. Some kind of outpost. I glanced around. The bunker was small. Barely enough space for a desk, a few chairs, and a shelf stacked with old radio equipment. That made my stomach churn. I pushed myself to my feet and approached the desk. The equipment was covered in dust. A small monitor sat beside a military-grade transmitter, its switches still flipped off. Reeves muttered behind me, "You think anyone else made it out?" I didn't answer. Morgan's face flashed in my mind. Her eyes, hollow and glowing. Her body glitching like something had rewritten her code. I forced the thought away. "We need a plan," Reeves continued, pacing now. "We can't just sit here. That thing's already taken out half a damn town." I turned toward him. Morgan said the research site was completely cut off from outside transmission. "If that's true, we need to get there." Reeves scoffed. "And how do you suggest we do that? We just lost our ride." I hesitated. He was right. The Humvee was dead. And judging by what happened to everything else that got caught in the glow, I wasn't convinced anything electronic would last long. I ran a hand through my hair, thinking. Then a thump. Both Reeves and I snapped toward the door. Another thump. Slow. Heavy. Something was out there. My stomach twisted. The glow outside flickered brighter, casting long, ghostly shadows along the bunker walls. Reeves raised his rifle, taking a step back. His knuckles were white around the grip. Another thump. This time it was closer. I held my breath. Then silence. A long, suffocating stretch of nothing. And then the radio turned on. I jumped back, my heart hammering. The old monitor buzzed to life, flickering with a grainy, distorted image. A face, but not a real one. It was wrong. Blurry, shifting, like a corrupted broadcast struggling to hold a signal. A voice crackled through the speakers. "Logan." Reeves and I froze. The voice had no tone, no emotion, but it knew my name. I clenched my fists. "What do you want?" For a moment, there was no answer. Then the face on the screen twitched, its mouth moving in strange, unnatural jerks. "You're already part of it." I felt my stomach drop. Reeves cursed under his breath, raising his rifle. "Shut it off." I reached for the power switch. The monitor glitched, the image flickering, and suddenly the screen showed me. I froze. It was a recording of me standing in the hydro plant, just hours before all of this started. I watched, horrified, as my past self checked the meters, adjusted the circuit breakers, and then the screen glitched again. This time, I saw something standing behind me, something that hadn't been there before, a shape, a glowing figure, watching me. Even then, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Reeves slammed his hand against the monitor. The screen flickered violently, then cut to black. The radio, however, was still on, still humming with static. The voice returned, low and faint. "It started with you." I took a staggered step back. "What does that mean?" The static grew stronger. The glow outside the bunker brightened. Then the voice whispered, "You opened the door." My blood ran ice cold. Reeves turned to me, his face hard. "What the hell is it talking about?" I couldn't answer, because deep down I already knew. I had been the one working the controls at the hydro plant. I had been there when the power grid surged, when the lights had flickered in that strange, unnatural way. I had seen the warning alerts flash across my monitor. I had heard the strange hum that filled the air before the town went dark, and I had ignored it because I hadn't thought it meant anything. Until now. Reeves grabbed my shoulder. "Hey, look at me." I forced my eyes up. "You didn't cause this," he said firmly. "Whatever the hell this thing is, it was coming one way or another." I nodded slowly, but the radio crackled again, and this time it wasn't just static. It was screams, blood-curdling, distant, people begging for help, and underneath it all, the soft, rhythmic hum. The glow outside the bunker shifted. I knew it was listening. I turned back to the desk, scanning the radio equipment. There had to be a way to use this to fight back. I flipped switches, adjusted dials, and suddenly a new signal broke through. Not the glow, not the static, something else. A voice. "Repeat, if anyone is out there, this is Site Echo 7. We are still operational. Do not respond on open channels. Do not transmit signals." If you can hear this, the transmission cut out. I exchanged a glance with Reeves. That had to be the research site. They were still alive. And if they had been hiding from this thing this whole time, then maybe, just maybe, they knew how to stop it. I took a deep breath and turned to Reeves. "We need to get there. Now." He nodded. Then a loud bang rattled the bunker door. Reeves grabbed his rifle, eyes snapping toward the entrance. Another bang, this time harder. The glow outside intensified, bleeding through the cracks. Then the radio whispered, "It's already inside." The door lurched inward. The light spilled in, and I realized we were out of time. The bunker door lurched inward, the metal groaning against the hinges. The glow outside spilled through the cracks, stretching long, ghostly fingers across the floor. Reeves braced his rifle against his shoulder, his breathing heavy. His eyes darted between me and the bulging door. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might snap. "Move!" he barked. I didn't argue. I shoved away from the radio equipment and scrambled toward the opposite end of the room. There had to be another exit, some way out. Bang! The door jolted again. A deep hum filled the air, vibrating through my skull. My fingers trembled as I scanned the bunker. There, a rusted maintenance hatch in the far corner. I lunged for it, my heart hammering. I gripped the handle and yanked. Locked. Of course it was. Reeves swore under his breath. The glow outside the door flickered, shifting, multiplying. I knew what that meant. It wasn't just one of them out there anymore. I turned back to the hatch, twisting the handle with everything I had. Nothing. I braced myself and kicked at the rusted frame, trying to break it loose. Bang. This time, the bunker door dented inward. My breath caught in my throat. Whatever was outside, it was getting through. Reeves fired. The sound thundered in the small space. The bunker door shook, but it didn't stop them. The glow brightened. The air felt wrong, charged with an unnatural electricity. My vision blurred, my ears ringing with a frequency I couldn't block out. I kicked at the hatch again, harder this time. It groaned, metal scraping against metal, then popped open. "Got it!" I yelled. Reeves was already moving. We dropped down into the darkness below just as the bunker door gave way. I hit the ground hard, my knees slamming into concrete. Pain shot up my legs, but I forced myself to keep moving. Reeves landed beside me, breathing hard. Above us, the glow poured in through the hatch. The figures descended. Reeves grabbed my arm and yanked me forward. Run! I didn't hesitate. The tunnel was narrow, the walls damp and crumbling with age. The air was thick with dust and the scent of mildew, but I didn't care. I just kept running. The sound followed us, that hum, deep and unnatural. It wasn't just a noise anymore. I could feel it inside my skull, in my chest, like a pressure pressing down, warping the air itself. Reeves gritted his teeth. We need to find an exit. I nodded, scanning the tunnel walls for anything, any sign of a way out. Then a ladder, metal, rusted, leading up to what looked like another hatch. This way, I shouted. Reeves reached it first. He slung his rifle over his back and climbed. The glow behind us brightened. The figures were coming. I forced myself to ignore them and scrambled up the ladder behind Reeves. He reached the hatch, shoved at it. It didn't move. I froze. No, not now. Reeves braced himself and slammed his shoulder against it. Nothing. I risked a glance back down the tunnel. The glow was almost here. Reeves, move. He gritted his teeth and shoved harder. The hatch gave way just a little. I threw myself against it with him. It burst open. Cold air rushed in, a stark contrast against the stifling heat of the tunnel. Reeves scrambled up first, hauling himself out. I followed, gasping as my hands hit damp grass. Then a blaring alarm rang out. I froze. It wasn't from our radios. It wasn't from the bunker. It was coming from somewhere ahead of us. Reeves pulled me up, his eyes wide. Then I saw it. A fence. Beyond it, a facility. A low, concrete research site, its exterior barely visible in the thick fog. Site Echo 7. We had made it. Reeves grabbed my arm. Move! We bolted forward, sprinting through the open field toward the gates. The sirens blared louder, echoing through the empty night. The glow behind us didn't fade. It followed. I chanced to look back and stumbled. The figures were closer than ever. Hundreds of them now. They weren't walking anymore. They were gliding, their bodies flickering in and out, moving in skipped frames. And they were gaining. Reeves didn't slow down. Neither did I. The gates loomed ahead, topped with razor wire, reinforced with steel plating. Someone was there, a guard. He waved his arms frantically. Hurry! We threw ourselves forward. The glow brightened. The hum was deafening. The figures reached for us. I felt something graze my shoulder. Then the gates slammed shut behind us. The glow stopped. I collapsed onto the pavement, my chest heaving. The static was gone. The figures had vanished. Reeves pulled himself to his feet, shaking. The guard, his face grim, his uniform unfamiliar, helped him up. Then he turned to me. Welcome to Echo 7, he said. His voice was flat, cold. I stared up at him, still catching my breath. Something about him felt off, like he had seen this all before, like he already knew what was coming next. I swallowed hard, because I had a sinking feeling we weren't safe yet. The gates slammed shut behind us, and the glow outside vanished. For the first time in what felt like hours, the world was dark again. I collapsed onto the pavement, my chest heaving. My body ached, my muscles burning from the sprint. Reeves stood beside me, his hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. The guard who had let us in stood still, watching. I forced myself to look up at him. His face was blank, his uniform unmarked. He had the bearing of military personnel, but there were no insignias, no name tags, just a stiff posture and cold, unwavering eyes. Inside, he said. His voice was flat, almost mechanical. I hesitated. What is this place? The guard didn't answer. Instead, he turned sharply and walked toward the main building. A large, concrete structure, its exterior weathered and cracked. Dim floodlights cast faint halos of yellow light against the fog that clung to the ground. Reeves and I exchanged a look. We don't have a choice, he muttered. I swallowed hard and followed. Inside, the air was stale. The hallway stretched ahead in a long, featureless corridor, the walls made of reinforced concrete. There were no windows, no signs, just the hum of fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The guard led us past a series of doors, each one marked with a number and a red warning label. Authorized personnel only. Do not enter without clearance. Warning. Biohazard containment. I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't just a research facility. It was something else. Reeves glanced at me, his expression unreadable. The hallway ended at a large metal door, secured with an electronic keypad. The guard entered a code without hesitation. The lock clicked, and the door slid open. Beyond it, control room, and they were waiting for us. There were 5 of them, men and women in lab coats and tactical gear, their faces weary but calm. They didn't react to us bursting in, didn't flinch at the desperation in our eyes, as if they had expected us. A woman stepped forward. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with sharp eyes and gray streaks in her dark hair. "You're the first survivors we've seen in hours," she said. I tried to steady my breathing. "What the hell is happening?" She studied me for a moment. Then she gestured toward the monitors lining the room. I turned to look, and my stomach dropped. The screens displayed real-time surveillance feeds from across the town, or what was left of it. The streets were empty. Cars sat abandoned. Some crashed. Others simply stopped mid-intersection. Houses stood dark and lifeless, their doors wide open, as if the people inside had vanished mid-step. And outside of town, the glow still lingered, hovering, waiting. Reeves took a slow step forward. "Where is everyone?" The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tapped a keyboard, pulling up another video feed, a recording. The timestamp in the corner read 5 hours ago. The footage showed a street corner, a group of people running. Then the glow appeared. It moved like liquid, spilling across the pavement, stretching toward them. One by one, the people froze. Their bodies glitched, distorting, flickering between what they were and something else. Then, in a blink, they were gone, just gone, like they had never been there at all. The glow receded, leaving behind nothing, not even shadows. I felt my throat tighten. Reeves cursed under his breath. The woman shut off the monitor. "That's what happens when you get caught in the light," she said. "You don't just die. You don't just disappear." Her eyes met mine. "You get replaced." The silence in the room was suffocating. I forced myself to find my voice. "Replaced by what?" The woman sighed. "We don't fully understand. We were monitoring the anomaly when the surge happened. The power grid overload. The event that started this." My blood ran cold. I knew what she was talking about because I had been there, at the hydro plant. I had seen the flicker before the town went dark. I had seen the warning alerts on my monitor. Ignored them. My chest tightened. This was my fault. The woman continued. "The light isn't natural. It doesn't behave like anything we've ever studied. It isn't just energy." She took a breath. "It's a signal." Reeves frowned. "A signal from what?" She hesitated. Then she turned back to the monitor and pulled up one more feed. A live transmission. At first, the screen showed nothing but static. Then something moved. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. A figure, standing in the glow. No, not just standing. It was watching us. Its head tilted slowly, as if it could see straight through the screen. And then it spoke. Not through the speakers, not through the radio, through the air itself. A voice, low, warped, layered, filled the room. "You are already part of it." The lights flickered. The glow outside the facility brightened. The hum returned, deep, resonating, shaking through my bones. The woman grabbed my arm. "If we don't stop it now," she said, her voice dead serious, "there won't be anything left to save." I barely had time to react before the alarms blared again. A red warning light flashed overhead. "Security breach detected. External containment failure." I felt my stomach drop, because I knew exactly what that meant. The light had gotten in. The sirens screamed, pulsing through the facility in a rhythmic, mechanical wail. "Security breach detected. External containment failure." I barely had time to react before the red warning lights flashed overhead, washing the room in an eerie glow. The air felt different, charged with something unseen, something that buzzed beneath my skin. Then a deep hum filled the building, the same sound that had followed us through the streets, the same sound that had rattled inside my skull as the figures flickered toward us. The light had found us. Reeves grabbed my arm. "We need to move. Now." The woman, Dr. Harlow, as she had introduced herself moments ago, was already sprinting toward a security panel on the wall. Her fingers flew across the keypad, typing in a command. The screen flashed access denied. Her face paled. No, I took a step toward her. What's wrong? She didn't answer right away. She tried the keypad again. Access denied. A new sound joined the alarms. A crackling static, low and rhythmic, crawling along the air like invisible tendrils. It slithered into my ears, beneath my skin. The screens in the control room flickered, shifting between the security feeds and something else. Footage of us standing in this room right now, but the timestamps were wrong. The footage showed things that hadn't happened yet. Me turning to look over my shoulder. Reeves reaching for his gun. Dr. Harlow staring at the screen in horror. Then the feed changed again. It showed the hallway outside the control room, and something was coming. A shape, bathed in a pulsing, flickering glow, moving in jagged, unnatural strides. My chest tightened. I had seen this before. We all had. Reeves didn't wait. He pulled his rifle up and fired at the keypad, blowing the control panel apart. Sparks rained from the wall, and the door mechanism hissed, releasing. Move, he shouted. We bolted. The hallway was a maze of dim corridors, each one lined with reinforced doors. The facility was built to contain something, but whatever security it once had was failing fast. The hum grew louder, pressing against my skull like a second heartbeat. Somewhere behind us, the lights flickered. A presence moved through the building, distorting space itself. Reeves reached a door marked secured exit, and I saw a keypad identical to the one in the control room. He clenched his jaw. Harlow, she was already moving. She pulled a small security override device from her coat pocket, slapped it against the keypad, and typed furiously. Behind us, the hum shifted, warping into something almost musical, like a voice singing in a way that no human could. A call, a summoning. The hallway darkened as the glow crept closer. Then, a low beep. The door unlocked. We shoved through, slamming it behind us. We emerged into a hangar-like chamber, lined with reinforced steel and emergency lighting. A large vehicle bay stretched before us, several transport trucks and armored personnel carriers sitting idle. This way, Harlow ordered, leading us toward the largest transport in the bay, a heavily armored vehicle with a reinforced shell. Reeves threw open the back hatch and we climbed inside. I barely had time to catch my breath before Harlow activated the vehicle's security systems. The engine rumbled to life, and the doors sealed shut with an airtight hiss. A small screen flickered to life on the dashboard, showing a live camera feed from outside. I wished I hadn't looked. The hangar wasn't empty anymore. The glow had followed us inside, and they were standing there. Not one, not 10, hundreds, figures bathed in light, their shapes flickering between human and something else. Some of them looked familiar, too familiar. I felt my stomach twist as I recognized faces from the town. People who had disappeared, people who had been replaced. They watched us, their heads tilted at unnatural angles, their bodies subtly out of sync with reality. Then, in a single, synchronized movement, they started walking forward. The glow brightened, the hum intensified, and suddenly I understood. They weren't trying to kill us. They were trying to make us one of them. Harlow didn't hesitate. She slammed a button on the console, and the vehicle's electromagnetic shielding activated with a low thrum. A pulse of invisible energy rippled outward, and the figures outside the vehicle glitched, their forms distorting violently. Some collapsed inward, vanishing into nothing. Others flickered, their outlines breaking apart like corrupted data. But they didn't stop. They just kept coming. Harlow gritted her teeth. We need to get to the core. I turned to her. What core? She met my eyes. The source of the anomaly. It's beneath the hydro plant. My breath caught. That was where it had started, where I had seen the first flicker, where I had ignored the warnings. My fault. It had always been my fault. Reeves pulled the vehicle into gear. Then let's finish this. Harlow keyed in coordinates, and the armored transport lurched forward, slamming through the hangar doors. Outside, the world was wrong. The glow had spread across the sky, pulsing like a living thing. The town we had once known was barely recognizable, its buildings warped and stretched in impossible ways. and in the distance, the hydro plant stood untouched, waiting. The ground trembled beneath us as we sped toward it, and through the vehicle's external speakers, the hum followed us, shifting, growing, turning into something that almost sounded like words, not spoken, not human, a message, a warning, or maybe a welcome. The vehicle rocked violently as we sped toward the hydro plant. The glow had spread across the landscape, pulsing through the town like veins of liquid fire. Everything around us warped. Buildings stretched unnaturally, flickering between their original forms and something impossible. But the hydro plant stood untouched, waiting. Reeves gripped the wheel tight, his knuckles white. "We're almost there. Harlow, tell me we have a plan." Dr. Harlow was hunched over the console, frantically inputting commands. "If we can reach the core, we might be able to." The glow surged. A wall of light erupted from the ground ahead, expanding toward us. "Brace!" Reeves shouted. The waves slammed into the vehicle, and for a moment, everything stopped. Time fractured. The world around us split apart, and suddenly, I wasn't in the truck anymore. I was somewhere else. I stood in the hydro plant's control room, but it wasn't the way I remembered it. The walls were wrong, shifting between steel and something organic. The monitors flickered, displaying impossible numbers, symbols that didn't belong to any human language. And standing at the console, I watched as I moved, oblivious to my own presence. I saw myself ignore the warning alerts, just as I had before. I saw the first flicker on the monitors. The moment everything changed, a whisper slithered through the air, weaving into my thoughts like smoke. It was always going to happen. The glow thickened, forming a shape beside me. Not a person, not a creature, just a presence, shifting like liquid light. I turned to face it, but before I could speak, the world ripped apart again. I was back in the truck, gasping for breath. Reeves was shouting, the vehicle spinning out of control. We skidded across the pavement and slammed into a barrier just outside the hydro plant. The impact threw me forward, seat restraints biting into my chest. The entire vehicle groaned as metal twisted and groaned under the force. Silence. Then the hum returned, louder, deeper, reverberating through my bones. I forced my body to move, hands fumbling with the harness. Beside me, Reeves and Harlow were already recovering, eyes fixed on the glowing structure ahead. The hydro plant had changed. The reactor tower pulsed like a living heart, tendrils of luminescent energy writhing from its base. And the figures, hundreds of them, stood between us and the entrance. Reeves exhaled sharply. "We're not making it through that." Harlow grabbed something from the storage compartment, a handheld device, blinking with blue lights. "We don't have to." She shoved it into my hands. "This is an EMP disruptor," she said. "It's not strong enough to stop the anomaly, but if we activate it at the core, it might sever the connection." I barely processed her words. My thoughts were still fractured from the vision, from seeing myself in the past. "Why me?" I asked. Harlow's eyes darkened. "Because you were there when it started. The anomaly has already touched you." The realization hit like a hammer. The flickering in my vision, the way the hum had gotten inside my head, the strange hallucinations. I had been marked. I had been part of it from the beginning. Reeves clapped a hand on my shoulder. "We cover you. You run." I swallowed hard. "What if I don't come back?" Reeves didn't answer. Harlow's face was grim. "Then make it count." The moment I stepped out of the vehicle, the figures turned. Every single one of them, their heads tilted in unison, their flickering bodies phasing in and out of reality. Then, as one, they charged. Reeves and Harlow opened fire, the gunfire ripping through the air, but it barely slowed them down. The figures didn't move like people. They twisted unnaturally, dodging bullets in ways that defied physics. I ran. The ground beneath me shifted, warping between pavement and something that wasn't solid at all. The hum grew deafening, sinking its claws into my brain. My vision blurred. The entrance to the reactor was just ahead. The figures closed in. A hand brushed my arm, and for a split second, my mind was filled with fragments of something else. A life that wasn't mine. Memories of a different world. A world where the light had already won. I tore free. I reached the door. I slammed through it, Inside, the air was thick with energy, crackling with a charge that made my hair stand on end. At the center of the room, the core, a sphere of pure, undulating light, pulsing like a dying star, and something stood beside it. Not a person, not a creature, something that was almost me. It turned slowly, its features shifting, flickering between my own face and something hollow, something empty. It smiled, and then it spoke. You were always part of it. I didn't stop to think. I lifted the EMP disruptor, my fingers tightening around the trigger. The glow rushed forward, and I pressed the button. The world detonated in white light, a soundless explosion, a rupture in the very fabric of reality itself. The hum screamed, splintering into 1,000 fragmented voices, before it was suddenly cut off. Darkness swallowed everything. I woke up to silence. The glow was gone. The town was empty. No figures, no hum, just the hollow remains of a place that shouldn't exist anymore. Reeves and Harlow were nowhere to be seen. And when I looked at my reflection in a shattered piece of glass on the ground, for a moment, my face flickered. Not fully human, not anymore. A whisper brushed against my mind. You didn't stop it. You became it. The light wasn't gone. It was inside me, waiting, watching. And when night fell over the empty town, I started to glow.